Today, I am joined by Jodie Jones from Nurture Infused Parenting. Jodie is a passionate parenting coach with a background in teaching and SEN education advisory. Like many parents, her journey into parenthood wasn't all cuddles and baby grows. It was a steep learning curve filled with challenges. And from what I know now about Jodie and her conscious parenting journey, it's been truly transformative for her and her family. In addition to her experience in education, she trained with the Jai Institute of Parenting and is currently deepening her expertise by studying to become a somatic experiencing therapist. I'm so excited for this conversation. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm excited to be here.
It's lovely to have you on, and my first ever guest, so no pressure. But we know, obviously, me and you talk about, conscious parenting all the time. We have our weekly chats, and this is kind of a bit of an obsession of ours. But obviously, you've been through your own challenges and your own journey with your eldest. Is your eldest, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would be really lovely to dive into that today because I think it will really help a lot of my listeners, our listeners actually, because, yeah, we can both share this. And if you'd like to let us know a little bit more about school avoidance, it's all about school avoidance and how that kind of looked for you. So, really, how did it come about in the first place?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it's my eldest, my son who's 13 now. But it started back around, I mean, he's never liked school. So you could say it started from nursery days really and the school, very early school. But after COVID, it 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 got worse. Now I call it school avoidance because he's never been a non-attender. So some children will avoid school. It used to be called school refusal. School avoidance kind of hints more that the child is avoiding something that's at school. So he displayed some really strong school avoidant behaviours, but it never came to a point when he wasn't in school altogether, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I mean, it came about after COVID. It started, I suppose, with I don't want to go to school. I'm not going to school. Lots of shouting in the morning, not wanting to get dressed, find it really hard to get out the door. Some days, and some parents will relate to this, even thinking, I don't know what to do here. I've got to be at work. I've got to take my child to school, and picking him up and carrying him and putting him in the car. It was really distressing thinking back. I forget now how bad it was. There was running, hitting, kicking the car, a lot of shouting, a lot of me feeling like this probably isn't safe to be driving like this. A lot of me not feeling like I was on his team. Um, and then when we get to school, he just would struggle to get in the door. So he might run or he might hide. And then when he came out of school, he wouldn't be running, to me. He'd be running at me, kicking me in the shins and then legging it. And so it was just a period of really, really intense behavior that I would say got worse definitely after COVID.
Right.
He's experienced anxiety pretty much all of his life anyway, but it was becoming quite unmanageable around that time, and it was impacting on the sibling, the whole family really, and my son obviously was really really struggling. Um, then he moved schools to a different school, and it was challenging there as well. So there would be some days. So yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Did he move schools because of this school anxiety, or was it just was that a different reason?
Yeah, it was a different reason. So at the primary school, we live in an area where there are middle schools, so he went up to year four, and there'd been some really difficult times at that school. Some things that as a parent I was really, really unhappy with how he'd been support or the lack of support, if you like. So he moved to school anyway, naturally at year five to a middle school. So it was kind of a fresh start, but by this point, I'd experienced a lot of trauma around trusting the education, the people that are, were supporting him in the education system. He'd experienced a lot of trauma with the school and things that had gone on. And so the new school was a fresh start. And in some ways, there were some positives, but in other ways, it was incredibly challenging for him. And so it got to a point where we were in year 6, and he was heading towards his SATs, and it just absolutely blew up. It was just so difficult. Some days it would take an hour to get him in the building. Yeah, so it was very, very challenging, actually, looking back. And now, just in comparison, he says bye, waves, and walks straight in the building now. So the same school. So we've been on a journey, and he's now just completely worlds away from where he was.
Wow, that is so nice to hear that he is completely different now, and sounds like almost like a different child as well. That must be so nice for you to see and to experience.
Yeah, it's incredible, really. I think sometimes it's good to just um take a minute and stop and look back and think, wow, we have come a really long way, because it takes so much time. So I was determined to make things better so that my mental health would improve, that his mental health would improve, that we wouldn't have these daily battles. And actually, it was months of years of work that we've had to put in. So to look back and go, wow, that was where we were. And now actually he goes in mainstream school, same school, and he has done so much work to get to where he is. It's incredible. Yeah.
I was going to ask what it looked like after you'd been on the school run, but I can just only imagine how much that would have taken out of you, from a cortisol point of view. Like, I mean, my mornings sometimes can be stressful. I can imagine a lot of mums have stressful mornings, and we all know the school run is like a tricky time of the day. And people then need to sometimes get to work, decompress, or go home and decompress. What did that look like for you? Did you know, like, how to, yeah, what did you do? I think I would have had to have a nap.
It was really, really tough. I sometimes I'd be late for work. I would just get back to the car and cry, or I get back to the car and I scream. I would phone people. So this is one thing that I changed. At the time, I didn't realize that the people that I was phoning for support, they really wanted to support me, but the conversations weren't helpful because my nervous system, I'd be so fired up and so dysregulated because I felt like I was failing, because I felt like I wasn't supporting my child. I didn't think the school was supporting my child. I felt so stuck that my nervous system would be so worked up, and I'd be experiencing so much stress that I'd get back to the car, and instead of deactivating, instead of regulating my system, because I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to do that. I would phone people and keep it going, keep up the cortisol, and get more fired up, more angry at the education system, or the person I was talking to would want to see me upset, so they would maybe go into fix it mode immediately, which I wasn't needing or wanting to hear at those points. So actually, the car journeys home would be difficult. I would be arriving at work sometimes late, sometimes really dysregulated. And also, like, I would give advice to parents at schools in similar situations. And they'd be like, oh, can you just come and live with us? And I always said, like, but I had this secret. Like, at my house, it wasn't all rosy. So I was very good at giving the advice, but actually implementing it in your own home when you've got all of these generational patterns of chaos and fight or flight and authoritarian parenting is really very, very difficult. And it's your own child, so they know exactly where to kind of hook you in. They're not doing it on purpose, obviously, but they're hitting your trigger points, which is different when you're an advisor going into a school giving advice to a child that's not yours. You can kind of do that very patiently.
Yeah. So at those moments when you were in the car feeling stressed and like you needed to phone someone, but they were trying to fix it and that's not what you needed. When was it around? Was it around that time, or was it after that time that you had fully kind of learned to implement the conscious parenting, or did that take a bit of time? How did you come to a point where you really knew what to do with things?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I wonder if I do know what to do, but there was definitely a point when it changed direction. And my family were worried about me. My mental health wasn't good. I was really struggling. Everybody could see it was taking its toll on me and the family. And so I started speaking to a therapist, and I had some talking therapy. And it was then really that everything changed, because I had these light bulb moments where I was like, oh, it's me. I need to change. Or not that I was the problem, but that I had the power to do something so different to support my child, and that my child wasn't the problem. I already knew that there were flaws in the education system, but I kind of thought, what's wrong with my child? And it was through that talk in therapy that I just realized and learned your child isn't the problem, and you can support your child to feel safe. So at that point, I was really starting to get interested in learning about anxiety and the nervous system, what fight, flight, freeze meant, what that looked like in a child. I was getting really into that, in a work capacity and in my personal life. I started reading books, and then I took a step back for two. I mean, there's a couple of reasons why I left my job to pursue parent coaching. One of them was I was just so passionate about it. I found this different way, this kind of amazing way of bringing up children that felt so much more in line with who I was and what I think I needed as a child and what I really wanted to give my children. And also, I realized my child needed me and he needed my time. And I needed to stop kind of fighting. I needed to go with the flow and stop fighting the fact that it was going to take him a long time to get through the door of school each day. So I left my job and I started my training to become a parent coach, which was incredible. But it also opened up a lot of reflection, a lot of difficult wounds, difficult trauma that I had to then face. So it wasn't easy. It's not been a peaceful journey for me to kind of adopt a conscious parenting approach. I still mess up regularly. But yeah, that was the point. It got so hard that something had to change. So the talk and therapy was the thing that kind of changed my trajectory, if you like.
Isn't that amazing that I think that this happens a lot as well with various types of coaches, not just parent coaches, but yeah, coaches and therapists out there. You start by getting help for one thing in your life, and then suddenly it snowballs into this. You just almost like have this awakening, don't you? And then you're like, oh, maybe this is why I'm like this, or maybe what you said about realizing that you had the power, say like correcting yourself, saying it wasn't me that was actually the problem, but you had the power to then obviously be able to fix. I can very much relate to that because there's been many things in the last few years where I've thought, well, it's not me that's the issue. It's my husband, like, blaming other people, and then realizing, actually, it's quite interesting that I have this trait, and that's, a pattern that's been there since childhood. And so I love the great thing about conscious parenting, and I guess just finding that self-awareness, I suppose, is that you can then have this ripple effect of small kind of incremental changes within you, because none of it's, like you said, none of it's easy. It takes a lot of time to actually heal and fix things or turn things around, create new patterns and habits. And it's not easy. It's painful, but it's so worth it in the end. And also, it's quite a long journey. It can be like a lifetime of work. So what did you think was, obviously we mentioned a little bit about the education system.
Yeah.
I know all schools are different, but really fundamentally the system is broken and it's very much still very Victorian, and we need a big update, and there's a lot we can say about that. But what was I just wanted to ask what kinds of things the school were doing when he would have been maybe kicking or fight mode. What sort of things would they do? Would they encourage you to physically drag him in, or what was their response to that?
To be fair to the schools, no, they've always, I think I just always had quite a confident presence. And so I've never really been challenged on what I'm doing. So they may have looked out of the window and thought, what is she doing? I don't know, but they've never really challenged or told me that. However, I am aware of things that have happened to other families in similar situations where schools have arrived at the child's house, or suggested that parents use certain strategies. But for me, no, the schools, I think what kind of happened was I was so anxious. My son was so anxious. I would arrive dysregulated and anxious. And then the TA that was coming to support us, she would just get anxious and tiptoe around things and try to be really supportive and kind to my son. Try to use strategies to help engage him. But at that point, I didn't know loads about the nervous system. I didn't really know individually for him what would help him feel safe. So I don't have a terrible experience of that. There are other things the school did, but again, that's probably for another time. But the thing is with schools as well, they don't always have the staff. So I applied for an EHCP for my son. We're lucky enough to get it straight away. And it meant that the school had some funding to be able to put a body in place. That was better at the second school he went to, because from day one, there was somebody assigned to him and they expected that transition to be difficult. When that TA was off on holiday or was off sick, that would become difficult because members of staff weren't available. So they'd be like, well, are you coming in then? No, okay, well, I've got to be somewhere. And then they'd go and I'd be standing there with him thinking, okay, I've got to be somewhere. I'm not sure what's going to happen now. He doesn't know what's going to happen now. We could be here for another half an hour before a member of staff comes back. So there's been difficulties. But no, I think they've always just kind of left me to my own devices to try to get him in. I've always tried to get him in.
Yeah. And it must be really hard for the staff member. I totally get that. Obviously, there's me slagging off the school system, saying this thing. Curriculum's old fashioned and it does need a lot of change, but also hats off to staff, because I know, funding is always getting cut. Teachers have a really tough job these days, and TAs and pastoral staff, and it's hard work. And I did find out yesterday a statistic that 1 in 5 children apparently in the UK have school avoidance. So if you've got a class full of 30 kids, that's a handful of them that don't want to be there. If you've only got one teacher and one TA, or even no TAs in the classroom, it must be hard to then try and get them to learn once they are in the classroom, if they are riddled with anxiety or whatever else it might be, neurodivergence. And so it's hard. So what golden nuggets of wisdom can you share? Like, what kind of strategy or what things really help to get you through?
Okay, so there's lots of different things. I've been reflecting on this to try and remember what did I actually do? What practical things did I do that shifted things so that we started making progress? And I mean, one of the things I did was I gave it time. So not everybody's going to be in a position where they can do that. I actually was able to do that. I left my job and I was like, I'm going to give it time. So in a morning, instead of fighting it, the goal was, we're going to school today. So that was the boundary, that the expectation is we're going to school today. And however long that took, I went with it. So I trusted that the more secure he felt in our relationship, that he trusted me, that the less time it would take to get him through the door over time. And there'd be blips and along the way with things he wasn't particularly looking forward to. So I gave it time. I started fighting. There's this meme that I always think of where there's a guy and he's like brushing the sea away from the beach. And I always think that kind of was me. I was so desperate to control his environment at school. I wanted to control the school. I wanted to control the way they responded to him. I wanted to make sure that they were putting in the strategies that they should be putting in. But I knew they weren't, because I'd been in 6 years in 50 or more schools observing, and I know firsthand that's not happening. There are lots of members of staff that are working well and doing a good enough job, but there are always going to be staff that aren't, and there are always going to be times when even the best well-intentioned staff are not going to meet your needs, the needs of your child. So one of the things I did was lower my expectations, address my trauma and my kind of trust issues with the staff, and look at it and think, do you know what? It's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. And instead of trying to control the school and getting really worked up over the fact that they'd forgotten to do something that day, that I would work on building my son's resilience, that we would be very honest at home and say, do you know what? Sounds like they're really messed up. I would believe him when he told me. I was all ears. Tell me about it. God, that sounds really hard. They forgot to give you your toilet pass, or they forgot this. That must have been so hard. Tell me about your experience. And then instead of getting myself so worked up and angry, I'd be like, right, how can I now support my child to empathize with the fact that the members of staff are human, to understand a bit about the school system and how, yes, it's not fair sometimes, and to teach him also respect and look at how can I teach him to still have respect and behave appropriately when he's feeling really big emotions at school and bring it all home. To kind of stop fighting and start going with the flow of it a little bit more. I accepted that, do you know what? I'm sending him to this school. That's a choice I'm making. Not that there's many other choices, but I've got to go with it. And I believe that he is capable of building this resilience, and letting him know that I believed that. So yeah, that was one of the things that I did.
I love that. And just, I know you've got other things to say, but I just want to just pause on that point, because I just love that. I feel like as soon as you make a decision on something, like today you're going to school, it's sort of sticking to that in your mind. It's like the decision's been made. You know the rule, I know the rule. It might take some time to get there, but you've got the compassion. You're giving him all the love, all the validation. But what's brilliant is that decision is there and it's not changing. And so that's kind of the boundary, and that's going to give him the safety, but also you the trust in yourself as well. So actually I can imagine that your sense of, because if you're feeling anxious, they totally sense it and feed off of it. So if you're just like, I'm the decision maker, I'm leading this, and this is what we're doing today, we're going to school, I can imagine that instantly it must have felt quite a bit more comforting to him, because you notice that with children, don't you, when they just sense and feed off of your kind of worries and things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another shift there was, and my therapist told me this, he said, you don't trust the staff. And I was like, I don't. And he was like, so why would your son trust the staff? Okay. So I don't think he's safe. So he's not going to think he's safe. So another shift there was me believing, do you know what? They're good enough humans. This is going to be okay. Everything is solvable. If it goes wrong, that's okay. So that, I think, helped me and my nervous system really believe it's okay. It's fine to have this boundary. You're not a bad mom sending him into this school. Because you can fear spiral very, very quickly when your child is highly anxious. And when you're highly anxious, yeah, you're right, you feed off each other. So yeah, absolutely. There was this thing as well that I always say, and it's not like it's not a strategy you'll find on Google, but I always say this, I stopped believing him when he said, I'm not going to school. So he might have been in his bedroom and I would wake up in the morning and I might just hear him slam his door, or I might just hear him make a noise or say something, and my body automatically believed he's not going. It became so scary to my system that I believed him. And then my body went into battle mode. It went into fight mode. I've got to do this. And then there would be days of just helplessness, shut down and freeze, because it was too much for my nervous system to handle. So there has been a lot of learning around the nervous system and me finding ways to send safety to my nervous system so I could be that adult and create that safe container for him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that, because I think sometimes it's so easy to fall into a pattern that can just become really unhealthy, but also addictive, because that happened the day before, or the day before, or the day before.
It's familiar chaos, isn't it?
Yeah, that familiarity that just keeps happening, but also it's just not helpful at all, but can be really hard to break. So it must have, I can imagine it might have been quite challenging for you to change that whole kind of pattern and mindset of, oh, I'm so used to believing that he's not going to school today, but now suddenly I'm thinking that he is.
Yes.
That's crack. But
yeah. And I remember I was standing outside school pretending to be a tree. Now, I wasn't pretending to be a tree, but I got this guided meditation that a trusted friend had sent me to help support my nervous system to feel grounded. So I was like, you're a tree. I'm a tree. I'm a tree. My legs are anchored. My legs are anchored to the floor. And I can feel my roots going through the ground. So I was doing this like stuff that I felt at the time was crazy, but I was doing as much as I could in the moment to send those signals of safety. And obviously you become better at that. You learn about your own nervous system individually and works. And over time, it began to work. I began to trust myself and my capability as much as trusting in his.
Yeah, love that. Be a tree. If in doubt, guys, be a tree.
This is it. I know. So yeah, I think I mean, another thing that we did do that again is not possible for everyone is that I requested part-time timetable for him. And we did that. I also requested that he be pulled out of SATs. Again, not possible for everyone. I'd quite like to do that for my other child at the moment, who's in year 6 and struggling, but they don't have an EHCP. So I think it would be a harder conversation. The school were very supportive of that because they could see how hard he was finding it. His behaviours, the fight, flight, freeze stuff would come out at school as well. And they supported that. And that was me committing to building a more secure attachment between myself and him. Our relationship had rupture after rupture after rupture. And I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to forget fearing about the future and what GCSEs he's going to get and where he's going to end up. And I'm going to do the here and now. And every day I'm going to make it my priority to laugh with this kid, to play with this kid, to get into his world and find out what lights him up. And we would do things like walk to the cafe, play Uno. He would have a glass of iced water and a brownie, and I'd have a coffee, and we'd walk back. And it was beautiful because we'd be outside in nature. And he was very resistant to begin with. His nervous system was in a state to begin with. Just getting him out the front door was hard. But now, fast forward a few years, he's really happy. He's like, do you want to go to the cafe? Should we walk to the village? So we'd get the nature, we'd get the quality time. Bedtimes, I always give him a good amount of time at bedtime, and we laugh. We barely laugh together, and it was I just let go of all this. Oh my gosh, he needs to learn because this kid is bright. He's really bright, and he's got so much academic potential. And I was so fearful that he wouldn't reach his academic potential. But that was really getting in the way of me seeing him in the here and now and what he really needed, because he wasn't going to learn. He wasn't going to reach his potential if he was stuck in fight or flight all of the time. And that was so pivotal for us. It was so good for our relationship. It was so supportive for him. And then we increased it back up. So at the start of year 7, he went back full time, and he knew that was the expectation. We'd looked around other schools, we'd looked around special schools, and he, at that age, he'd matured a little bit, and he could decide, you know what, I want to stay here and I want to make it work. So we were able to put in some firmer boundaries. Because again, I think a lot of parents will relate to this. When your child's anxiety is sky high, it's easy to fall into permissive parenting because you're so fearful of what's going to happen, what they're going to do. You're so fearful that they're not feeling good, and you want to manage their emotions so that they don't experience the distress as well. So we were able to really build on the firmer boundaries in the relationship as well. And I always remember this one, and it's one of my favorite things. I will always, and said to him from the first day, I will always do a nice goodbye. So when I dropped him at school, no matter how long, if it took 2 minutes or an hour, we would always part with a goodbye. So he would get to a point where he could kind of look at me and wave. And I knew that was our nice goodbye. It was time for me to go. Now that differs sometimes because school staff sometimes will be like, go on, they're fine when you've gone. They're fine when you've gone. And so you can get into this habit of leaving before your child is ready, and that can break trust as well. Yeah. So we had this where he knew, and probably the staff be like, she's still here.
Did you mention to the staff, like, we need to do our final goodbye? Like, did you kind of like give them?
I can't remember, probably, knowing me, probably, because there was a time when I just felt like I had to explain everything to him.
I feel like I would have wanted to explain and say, like, look, we're not, please don't force him to go in because we want to do our nice goodbye. Because I say,
yeah.
yeah, wanting to get them in, which is understandable. But I love that. I love that you both agreed to do a nice goodbye. That's lovely.
Yeah, it was beautiful because it sets your day up there. You're not going back to your car and crying and thinking, oh my God, what have I just left him? I've left him in the lion's den. You
Yeah.
go back to your car thinking he got to a point where he was regulated enough. And luckily, the staff were, we did talk to each other. It's not always been plain sailing, but they would then give him, if he needed time to regulate, that's what he would do once he was in the building and he'd finished he'd said goodbye to me. So yeah, it's been a journey. And, this morning he just walked off and waved, and it's incredible. Even things like now he'll go through the main entrance, the main gate with all the other kids, and he meets his friends outside, and things like that just weren't possible. They weren't possible. I felt like I was the only mom in the whole of the village or the country at times with a child that was running around, and I was the only human not in work and the only human not able to control my child. It felt so isolating.
Yeah.
And now it's just, I have to pinch myself. I'm like, oh, wow, this is what other people experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing where he's got to.
That is incredible. And I think you deserve a massive pat on the back. And you must feel so proud of yourself, because I think if you don't know about the nervous system and how the body works and, stress responses, and if you don't really understand anxiety and, I don't know, it's just that human behavior, and knowing that children find it really tough to label things and regulate and all of that kind of stuff. If you don't know about that stuff, it's so hard to go from where you would have been a few years ago to where you are now. If you could choose one thing, what would it be if someone had to, like, I don't know, support their child with this tomorrow?
So I would say taking away all of the school stuff and all the different things that are going on and just focusing on your child. If you're in a situation where you are forcing them to get dressed, you are dragging them to the car, you are threatening them, bribing them, you are getting in a state with each other and it's impacting on your relationship, then they need different support. So they need you to slow right down, and you go first of all to rebuilding your relationship with them, and everything else has to take a back seat. So don't allow the fears of their education to get, or the fears of the, things that school may have said to you, to get in the way of your attachment and your relationship with your child, because the only way to make progress is if you have got that foundation of a secure attachment with your child, where your child feels seen, heard and supported. So I would go right back to basics. That would be my advice.
Yes, that is brilliant advice. And I think it's all too easy to actually take the advice of the school or really listen to what they're saying and put that in front of your child's needs, or like front of your the relationship with your child, which is actually more important, because you don't we're a lot of mums that I speak to are people pleasers. We don't want to upset the school, we don't want to embarrass ourselves, we don't want other parents to kind of be listening in and thinking, what the hell's going on there? And so there's so many different reasons why we are inclined to do what we think is best for the school, or just to get them in there quickly. And yes, some people have to rush off to work, and I've been there where I've been in a rush and I need to get home for a 9 o'clock call or something like that. But yes, I totally agree with what you're saying there. I think it's so important to just protect that attachment, make sure that they are feeling safe, make sure that, yeah, it just comes first, doesn't it? It's so important. So that's brilliant. Yeah, great advice. Oh, thank you, Jodie. I think that, there's so much more I would love to ask, and there's a lot of stuff I'd love to talk about in terms of, the school system, and delving into the way that children are taught these days and that kind of thing. But I think it would be great to maybe have you on at some point in the future to talk about the kind of learning side of things. And I do agree with what you're saying about kind of almost putting the academic worries, like especially if you're from a background of really wanting to hit those targets and worrying about like certain educational needs being met by a certain age or that kind of thing. It's really hard to almost put that on the back burner, because really, if your child is not feeling safe and if they don't have those basic human needs met, which could be connection with a parent at the school gate or whatever, then they are not going to be in any fit state to learn. So I love what you said about that earlier. So maybe another episode I could have you back on and talk about like education and learning and teaching. But for now, let me know, where can people find you? What's your website? What are your socials? Let me know.
Yeah, so mainly I'm most active on Instagram, which is nurture.infused.parenting. And I have a website which is I don't know, I think it's nurtureinfused.com, is it?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the show notes. Jodie has got some absolutely fantastic reels on her Instagram. So if you haven't been following her already, check them out, because she really gives some great advice, like practical advice on what's going on for your child at a behavioral level, and like with their nervous system. She really kind of spells it out. So I know sometimes I might use words that are not used day to day, like, and I get told off by my husband all the time for saying words like dysregulated. In English, I don't know what you're saying. But what I love about Jodie's Instagram is she kind of talks about things in layman's terms, and it's really nice and easy to understand. And so please check out her Instagram. Jodie's a brilliant parent coach, and her somatic experiencing. You're halfway through your course, partway through your course.
Yeah, completely. It's last, yeah.
Yeah, she's brilliant, because she brings in her therapeutic expertise into her parent coaching. So she's phenomenal at what she does. So there we go. I've bigged you up.
Thank you, Laura. I'll slip you a tenner for that. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you so much, Jodie, for having you on. It's been great. And I love the conversation.
Thanks, Laura. I loved it.
It's been great. Take care. Bye.